Uh, let's get this started. So let's just start off with who I am and why I am talking to you today about this. So my name's Naythan Din-Kariuki. I've been involved in football for quite a few years now, as various different roles. But I started off my time in football by doing a degree in football studies and business at Solent University in the UK. From there, I actually got a coaching role at Kariobangi Sharks. And at that time, I was the youngest coach in professional Kenyan football. I think I was 20 years old. 19, 20 years old when I joined Sharks. It's season we gained promotion from the NSL to the Kenyan Premier League. I was one of the goalkeeper coaches. Since then, I've joined the PFSA, which is the Professional Football Scouts Association, which has allowed me to scout for several clubs, including the clubs down there. 2018, joined the Talent ID program, the FA, so became FA certified in talent identification, and actually worked for a football agency as their head of analysis. So kind of just monitoring how their clients were performing, any potential clients who were coming up, but still around this idea of scouting and understanding football from an analytical point of view. Since last year, I've been a master's student at Loughborough University, sports business and leadership. But yeah, that's me. I've been in scouting now, I think, since 2014, in football since 2014, scouting since about 2015, 2016. But who you guys, I don't know if you can put in the chat, who you guys are, what you want to learn today, and how long you've been involved in scouting in any role, be it as a coach, right, has to identify talent for your team, scouting for bigger clubs, agencies, that sort of thing. Maybe just put in the chat who you are and everyone kind of give that a read so you can learn who are amongst here today. Let's launch right into it. So first thing, I know a lot of people in here will be most likely Kenyan or African, but I know there are a few of us who are joining us from further afield. A lot of the things I will be saying are pretty much catered and more of an idea of how it works here in Kenya. Ideas that Kenyans can learn, Africans can learn from this. I will try to bring up some more broader ideas that perhaps might not be applicable here generally. As this is quite an introductory thing, there's going to cover a lot of the very basics. So perhaps if you've scouted before, I do apologize if there's some stuff you've heard many times. If you've been coaching for many years, there's some stuff here that you will undoubtedly know about already. But I still hope generally you can learn something from this and we can all grow together. So first up, what is Talent ID? So this is basically if you're involved in talent identification, this is what you're doing. The task is not just to see what is, but to begin to envisage and work towards what might be. Basically, what we're trying to do is understanding which player has the skills, both mental and physical, to achieve the most, and we're then looking at placing them in a position for further development. So this idea that talent ID is just being able to look at a player and say, oh, they're good, they're not. It's not really just about that. It's about being able to look at and see the future with them and place them in a position to succeed. So let's start off. This was the FA who came up with this list. And it's basically, what are the qualities of a scout? So on your screen, there should be several skills that the FA has decided makes a good scout. Now, I don't necessarily agree with all of these or agree that they're that important to it. But, football is a game of opinions. So I think we can all form our own opinions about where we see ourselves, where we see these. But the first step I want you guys to do is kind of read these and reflect. Reflect on where you see yourself as fitting in. Where do you see your observation skills versus your communication skills? Are you trustworthy? Can you make clear decisions? So just kind of read through these and give yourself a rating on them. The other thing I want you to do is maybe consider any alternative skills that aren't listed here that you think are important in the process of scouting. So the first step in scouting a player and identifying talent is knowing what you're looking for. I think this is something which perhaps we all kind of think we know what football is or we know what sport is, but we don't actually really can break it down and look at it. If you're ever involved in a coaching course or in a coaching capacity, this is something you're quite well aware of. So I call this the 4 skills of football. The FA call it the 4 corners model. The Dutch call it something else. German something else. But it all breaks down to basically this: is that football can be broken down into these four areas. So your technical skill, your physical skill, your psychological, and your social skill. And these pretty much make up the entirety of a player's ability. So there's some players who are a lot more technical than they are physical. There are players who are more psychological than they are social. But all of these add up to make a complete player. I think it's a very important step is to understand that even though this one is very much aligned with what the FA does, developing your own idea about how you break down football is very important to understand these individual skills. The other thing to consider is how are these linked? So here I've included passing range, but I think we'll all agree that passing is both a technical skill and a psychological skill. It's great to be able to play a 30-yard pass, but do you know when to play it? The other thing to consider is how do these change as a player changes age? So you would never expect the same skills from a 9-year-old as you would a fully professional player. It just would not realistic. So it's about managing expectations at different age groups. These four skills also change depending on position. So here I've made one that's modeled on a centre back, and I've modeled it on who I think is the best centre back in the world, Virgil van Dijk. You notice here I've added a few more for psychological. I want my centre backs to be brave. I want to see their focus. In terms of social, I want to see coachability. I want to be able to coach my centre backs to do what I want them to do. But this contrasts to necessarily what I want my goalkeepers to do. It's not the same skill set, and I've modeled my goalkeepers on Jan Oblak. So you can see there is slight difference in how I've gone about defining a technical skill, defining a psychological skill. And I actually put here coaching skills. So I want to say that this is different from coachability. Goalkeepers, in my opinion, need to be coaches on the field. They have the best viewpoint, but they need to be coaching the outfielders, putting them in the right places if you're going to succeed. So that's just the difference in the four skills between two positions. The other thing to consider is that this can be as broad or as detailed as you'd like. So actually, I've made a more detailed one for goalkeepers. And it quickly becomes quite large and quite nerve-wracking to look at. So I tend to prefer a simple one, but if you're going to make your own, I think the first step is understanding how detailed you want to be, because football breaks down to individual skills very quickly. So the next thing I want you guys to reflect on, so is first off, as we discussed earlier, about the skills of a scout. So I want you to rate yourselves on these skills, and I want you to really look at that list and determine how can you improve any areas of weakness you may have. When it comes to the four skills of football, I want you to really think about, do you feel one is more important than the others? So is being technically gifted better than psychological? Is being physical more important than social? And I want you also to think what skills are important for each position. So perhaps maybe after this, you can sit down. My advice would be pick a player you really admire. So if you're a Manchester United fan, maybe as for a striker, you want Marcus Rashford. Look at his game and break him down into those four areas and see how in depth you can go on his individual skills. So let's get moving to so as I mentioned earlier, scouting is talent ID is about finding talent not where it is today, but also where it will be. So there's this concept of a player's performance today with their potential for future performance. This is probably something where people get a lot of things wrong. I think they tend to be, especially with young professional players about 17 or 18, where I don't want to say overestimate, but we sometimes look at their performances early on and judge them to become the best in the world. So I'm thinking Naythan Din-Kariuki. Remember when he broke through at United, there was a lot of discussion about how he could go to the very top of the game. And while he's had a good career for himself, perhaps the expectations that he'll be a Ballon d'Or winner wouldn't ever come true. So part of scouting is understanding that just because someone is performing today doesn't necessarily mean they'll go to the very top. But let's start off by defining some terms here. So what is talent and what is potential? I think this is something that we kind of do get lost in. So here's just a quick definition of it. Talent, superior mastery, and systematically developed abilities and competencies to a level that place individuals in the top 10% of individuals active in the field. That is a really wordy and I think quite tricky thing to understand. I prefer to look at it as talent is the raw material someone has to succeed. This definition here was actually come up with for, I think, violinists, so musicians. And I think for musicians as well as footballers, looking at it from the point of view as these are the raw materials I have in order to be successful. And same with this definition of potential, quite a wordy, I think, confusing way to look at it. I look at that as the process of building something. So if you take these as the raw materials, this is building it, you'll end up with, if you can have the right of these and the right of this, you'll end up with a very nice chair, for example. Take this building analogy. We see that in this. This is the model of giftedness and talent developed by, I think he's Canadian psychologist, again, for musicians, but it does apply to footballers. Essentially, as a footballer, you come in with your natural ability, with your potential, you're given a chance, and you enter the development process. And there you enter your personal catalysts, so motivation, drive, and what they call PCDEs, which are psychological characteristics of developing excellence. So those are who you are as a person. How does that affect the development process? They're also external catalysts. So the quality of coaching you receive, the facilities you're at, the support your parents give you, how you handle balancing school and playing. All of these are things you cannot control as a player. Sorry, these are things you cannot control as a player. These are things you cannot control as a coach or administrator or whatever. And at the end, you come through this development process, you have systematically developed talent. With this element of chance and two things you necessarily can't control, to get the best talent, you have to start off with the best potential. I think this is something that we often get wrong here in Kenya. I think in many places in Africa actually is often the players who enter the development process aren't necessarily the players with the highest potential. It's no secret that there are players who enter this system who perhaps know someone, or they know someone who knows someone. Their coaches are friends with the right people, and they are the people who get selected and enter this development process. And it's probably a big reason why the talent we develop is not quite at the same level as other countries. As a scout, this is where we come in. This is where we get our value from. If you can identify potential, you are a valuable scout. So, performance versus potential. Here you go. This is essentially what a scout does every time they watch a player. They have to place them here, their performance and their potential on any given day. The top prospects, these guys here, are the easiest people in the world to see. Someone could never watch football a day in their life, but if they watch Messi, they would tell you he's a talented player. He's a top prospect. If someone watched 16-year-old Wayne Rooney, they would say exactly the same. But a good scout actually can place players here accurately. The advantage is gained from actually identifying players who maybe fit here in overperformers and struggling prospects. If you're a good scout, these are the two hardest places to place players, but if you can do this accurately, you can gain an advantage. So I'm thinking a struggling prospect, I'm thinking someone like a Jenny Vardy. He was left out of the process for such a long time because no one could see the potential that he has. No one could accurately place him here. When he eventually was placed here, we actually saw his potential was really high, even though his performances on a given day might have been low. Stragglers are people like me. So when I was a player, I was a goalkeeper, not a very good one. Any scout who came to watch me could have said, actually, his performances are very low. His potential is also very low, probably not going to play. So these two axes, the stragglers and the top prospects, they are quite easy to identify. But as I said, the advantage is gaining both performers and struggling prospects. The other thing to consider is that players change where they are on this every single time they play. Good players have bad days, and bad players have good days. That's why as a scout, it's never just enough to form your opinion on a player after seeing them once. A great example that I think is a Kenyan player is Eric Ouma, Marcelo, as you know him better. He is, I think, a great example of someone who's really moved across this chart. When he came through at Gore, I watched him and I said, wow, this guy's got all the potential in the world and he's performing excellently. He then got his move, I think it was to Georgia, and he kind of fell off the face of the earth a little bit. And we couldn't really rate his performances, so they started to come down here. His potential was still high because the things that made him great here still made him great, could have made him great down here. Eventually he moves to Sweden and we start seeing his performance pick back up and he ends up back here. His potential has always existed. It's his performances that have changed. On the flip side of that, someone like Ravel Morrison is someone who really has done the opposite. His performances started off quite high and have just slowly sunk and sunk and sunk and sunk. And actually, we started to realize that maybe when he came through, we overrated his potential. His technical skill was very high. His psychological skill and social skill were perhaps lower. So the things that made his potential that we saw as really high were actually being brought down by things we refused to see. So this concept, placing a player on this grid, gets clouded by various things. So we're going to go through some of the things that cloud it. So non-linear talent development is a big one. Talent doesn't develop in a straight line. No one does. No one improves a set amount every single week. And it's very individual. So these are three great examples of people who had very different paths to development. So I'm sure you can recognize these two guys here. Harry Kane, Jamie Vardy, perhaps two of the most important strikers in English football in the last decade. Both have multiple caps for England. One's an England captain. This is them on. This is Harry Kane on loan at Leicester, where he was teammates with Vardy, and I think they combined for 4 goals in their time together. They just needed more time to season and become the great pros that they would be. And these are also great examples because they are 2 examples of the academy system in England sort of failing. Harry Kane was let go from Arsenal, I think, at 13 years old. Jamie Vardy wasn't even in the system. So these are 2 players who there wasn't enough patience with them at a lot of clubs to let them develop and let them form into the great players they would become. I know, using him an example again. Ravel Morrison, when he was 16 years old, he would train with the United's first team and was comfortably the best player on the pitch. He was running rings around Rio Ferdinand and Nemanja Vidic at 16. And everyone in the world thought he was the next, great player. In fact, he was teammates with Pogba and Lingard, but was comfortably 20 times the player they were at the time. But actually, we realize now he was just a very early developer. He developed the technical skill and the physical skill to dominate youth football, but he never quite developed the psychological and social side to take that to the next level. We'll look at 3 more examples here. Wayne Rooney, Frank Lampard, Joe Hart. So Wayne Rooney, at 15 years old, was a man. He was an adult at 15, fully grown man at 15, and that allowed him to play first-team football for Everton. And actually, at 16, he was probably Everton's best player the season they got to the Champions League. The season they finished 4th. He kind of plateaued though. I'm a Manchester United fan, so I love Wayne Rooney. But he was very much a similar player that he was at 18, that he was at 28. He didn't really have a second layer of growth in him. And that was a very high level of player. Frank Lampard was Mr. Steady. So he developed very normally. In every England youth team possible, schoolboys, youth international, first team player, consistently very good. Everyone knew that he would make it to the top. Joe Hart was a bit of a late developer. Never really part of any of the England youth teams, not in England schoolboys, not in England under 16s. But he skipped straight to the 21s and into the first team. All 3 of these players at one time captained England. So it doesn't really matter to you as a player if you're an early developer, an average developer, or late developer. You can still end up being a great player. You just have a different path to it. Now, where does this come into scouting is actually we need to be aware that all 3 of these exist. Don't take the 15-year-old as being the perfect player and you think he's going to go right to the top just because he's good at 15. He could have just developed very early. Same with the late bloomer. Don't write people off until you have to. I always say if you're not playing at the if you're not playing at necessarily the like highest level by 17, 18 in Kenya, you might want to readjust your tactics, your goal. So I get a lot of people ask me, I'm playing at this club, this club, this club. I am 20 years old, but I want to go play in Europe. The truth is that's a very difficult thing to do, but as a scout, we have to try to keep the door open as long as possible. So I think probably about 17, 18 is the max we can go. But you can still be a great player no matter how you develop. In fact, actually, the last time I ran this exact presentation, we had a Kenyan Premier League player on who he said he never realized that he himself was a late developer. So I think, even for players, maybe evaluate where you are on this. The other thing that sort of clouds our judgment of players is players' age. Now, this isn't as simple as looking at a calendar or looking at date of birth and judging how old someone is. It's a little bit more complicated than that. So there's this thing called the relative age effect. So I'm going to pose you guys a question here to think about. These are two footballers. They're both the same age, but who do you think is better? Well, if you think about that for a second, obviously this player will be better. She can walk. He can barely open his eyes. But they're both less than 1. So the relative age effect is basically this idea that people born in the same year aren't actually the same age. If you think about it, a baby born in January is almost a full year older than a baby born in December. They will have a full year of developing over this other player. Now, this has a big, big impact when you're a baby, because you grow. That's why we say babies are 6 months old, 9 months old, 18 months old. We don't say they're 1, So we judge things in months. So it has a big impact when you're a baby. But the second time it has a big impact is during puberty. So this is a photo from an under 13 game in Belgium, what I guess must have been 15 years ago. These are both the captains, both 13 years old. This player, huge, massive. He's basically a man at 13, and this guy, not so much. So what happens here is, quite likely, you can guess, this player had a better game. His physical component will just be so much higher than this player that even if this is the best technical player on the planet, he will struggle to beat this guy. So what does this mean for us scouts? Well, when you're watching a game, if you're watching someone absolutely physically dominate the match, and he's about this age, 14, 13, 15, it could just be a case of he's just developed he might just be older. He might have extra months of development over this player that has made the difference. This is a really common problem everywhere in the world. And I'm going to show you evidence of this. This is how it affects English academies. So the red bars here are the makeup of UK academies. So professional clubs, your United, your Arsenals, their academies. It's skewed heavily to people. So as an explanation, in England, the football year obviously starts in August and runs till May. So the September birth school year, the September births are the older ones, the August births are the younger ones. So actually, we see in English academies, 45% of players are born in that first 3 months of the school year, and it tapers down all the way. But obviously, people are born roughly evenly across the years. So even the biggest clubs in the world, the biggest academies in the world, fall prey to this. It's important as scouts that we, look beyond the physical components in a player, especially at that age, and look at actually the smaller technical details that they're performing. But I'll go into that a little bit more later. Similar to the relative age effect is this concept of maturation. So I want to think back to when you were about 13, 14, 15, when you're going through puberty. Your friends and you developed at different rates. I remember I grew really tall really early. I think I've been my height for a very long time. But I had friends who were tiny the entire time we were in school together, but they hit nearly 17, 18 and suddenly shot up like a bolt. And they're now much taller than me. This is a concept of maturation. So people mature at different rates. Players who are early maturers, such as, I'll go back, this guy here. By the way, this is a photo of Romelu Lukaku. who obviously has gone on to do brilliantly for himself. But this is him at 13. But a player like Lukaku, because he's an early maturer, he had an advantage in explosive power, anaerobic power, so basically his ability to continue working, sprinting, agility, endurance, and ton of other things. He would dominate any match he would be in purely from a physical point of view. He just also happened to be a very good footballer. But this is something that happens all over the world. You see it here in Kenya, where these big, strong, early maturers dominate a game and people think they're good footballers. So how do we look beyond maturation and the relative age effect is value the process and not the results. So by that, I mean, just because someone scores a hat trick, you need to look at that hat trick critically. If it's someone who is a 6'2", 14-year-old, and they score every goal by out muscling the centre back and then toe poking it in, I would actually say that's not necessarily a good hat trick. That's just them using physical tools that will one day be caught up to. They might not necessarily be a good footballer. Identify good mistakes. So one thing I always like to say on this is I always like a centre back who likes to play adventurous passes. So like line splitting passes, breaking the lines, looking to progress the ball. A 13-year-old who might be a late maturer, who lacks the strength or the physical ability to play those passes with regularity today, but might in the future, I like to see them attempt it. So if they're attempting it, it means that their psychological component is high enough to recognize that this is something they could do. They just need their body to catch up with their mind. The other thing is look at the quiet players. So by quiet, I don't mean not loud. I mean on the pitch, they might not be the most physically gifted. They might not be the quickest, the strongest, but they might be the most technically sound players. So I'm looking at a player like Xavi. If we had to go and say, go wrestle Xavi, anyone could do it. He's, light as a feather. But his technical skill is so high that he could dominate a game where he was the least quick player, the least strong player on the pitch. So as a scout, when you're watching someone absolutely dominate a game with their strength, with their pace, maybe take a step back, look away from them for a second, and survey the rest of the players. Because actually, the best technical player and the player who will achieve the most might be one of these quiet players. So this idea of player age, just going back to it actually doesn't end there. There's so many things we go into, but we just don't have the time. Psychological age, that's going back to that Ravel Morrison idea, is he wasn't psychologically old enough, mature enough to be a professional footballer. So when you're scouting a player, also try to get some background information. What are they like, in school? Are they good behaved? Are they hardworking? Because all of that builds into their psychological age and ultimately their performances. Biological age and chronological age, again, maturity and relative age effect, we covered those. But the last one, and this is something that is huge here in Kenya, huge, is training age. A lot of players enter the system at different times. Not everyone gets access to coaches, to facilities, to purposeful training at the same time. A player who enters the system at 9 years old and has a coach at 9 years old will naturally have a higher performance ability at a given point than someone who enters it at 15, just because they've had more time to get used to it. So, for example, going back to my awful goalkeeping, I never in my life had a goalkeeping coach, and it shows. I will always be playing catch up to people who did have a goalkeeping coach when they were growing up. So I think it's important to consider all four of these when you evaluate a player. Where do they fall in these different categories? The other thing is, don't be afraid to ask. I think especially here where there's a lot less regulation on things, there is an element of you can just kind of go up to a coach and just say, hey, how long has this guy been training with you? And you get instantly, his training age. You can find out his birthday, so his chronological age. And you can find out something about him, so his psychological age. So just a reflection. What does talent look like for you? Think about who you think is the most talented player you've ever played with or ever seen. I know mine. Mine is a guy I played in high school with, and he was one of these quiet players. He wasn't the quickest, wasn't the strongest, but a supremely technical player who, if there had been better talent ID processes around him, I really think could have been elevated to another level. The other thing is to define what potential looks like to you. Some things that make potential in my mind is I think players who've always got pace, I think will always be able to do well. There are tons of examples of players playing in the Premier League and playing for their countries for many years who really had nothing beyond pace. So if a player has pace, I automatically in my head give them, 2% more in terms of what I think their potential might be. But I want you to define other aspects that you think work for you. And also, how can we best keep the door open for players? So if you're looking at late developers here, if you believe they have potential, what can you do as a coach, as a scout, as a parent, as a teammate to ensure that they get enough time to fulfill the potential that's there for them? So that's just a couple of things for you guys to think over. Okay, bias. So this is a big thing in scouting, is our scouting bias. So what is a bias? It's your inclination or prejudice for or against one person or group, especially in ways considered to be unfair. The key thing here is for or against. It's possible to have positive biases about players, about people, but all of that clouds our judgment as a scout. So these are just 3 types of biases. I think they are over, I have a list somewhere of 150 different biases that exist, but these are the 3 that I think I most fall prey to, because every scout does. But also I think that affects football generally. So the halo effect, the tendency to think everything about someone is good because you like that person. This one I know is me. Nailed on is me. If I like someone, I really want them to do well, and I really try to see the best in them. This doesn't just mean just the player, it could mean their coach. If I like their coach and I like what their coach has done in the past, I am naturally biased to assume that what they're doing now is good and want them to succeed. Perception bias, the tendency to form stereotypes about certain groups that make it impossible to make objective judgments. So this one is again big everywhere in the world, but I'm going to give an example of here in Kenya. Kenya's managed to have Indian ministers, parliamentarians, all sorts of jobs, all sorts of parts of society, but there's never been a Kenyan Indian footballer that I know of. Is that because Indians just don't play football in Kenya, or is it that we never look towards them? There's an idea that you have to be a certain type of person to play football in Kenya, and that's just not true. In fact, some of the most talented players I've ever played with don't fall necessarily into this category. So just keeping a mindfulness of when you're looking at players, just because they are a certain way, and this is not just necessarily about race. It could be players who wear pink boots, you have an assumption that they're soft. That's not necessarily the case. And I'm sure in all different parts of the world where you guys are from, you have different stereotypes that exist about footballers that if you don't fit into, you think they can't play. Confirmation bias, the tendency for people to seek information that confirms pre-existing beliefs. This one is, if you trust me as a scout, which I hope you do, and I tell you, oh, I think this player is good, and you go watch them, you might just already be in the mindset of how can I see what Naythan sees, and you'll want to agree with my opinion. This is true in terms. This happens to everyone in every walk of life. In football, it's very true. I fall foul of it all the time, of listening to a pundit and not being able to form my own opinion and leaning on what someone else has told me. What I want you guys to do is think about what is your bias. So think about any bias you have in regard to football. I know a big one I have is so when I was playing, I was a good shot stopper. I could save anything, but I was unbelievably terrible with my feet. And I think my bias is when I look at goalkeepers who are good with their feet, I begin to overrate them. I don't want to say I'm jealous of them, but I'm kind of jealous of them. So I think when I watch a player, a goalkeeper, he can, take it around a player and play these line-breaking passes. I start to look at the complete package in a slightly better light, which I'm very aware of that, and I have to try and control that. So you guys maybe think of, were you aware of these biases before, and maybe what steps do you take to overcome them, if any? So this is how you can overcome your bias: is report only the facts. State what you see, nothing more, nothing less. Don't just assume things about a player. If you see someone who is you can see that they're very quick, but in the game, they never once beat their man. Don't start saying, oh, he's a great dribbler just because he's quick. You have to be very objective when you write a report. Write literally just the things that you see in front of you. This is also why it's important to watch a player multiple times, because it's very possible he just doesn't touch the ball a lot that game, or he's just not on form. You can only, once you only state what you only see, if you report only what you see, you'll have a higher quality report free of bias. A big one, be ready to be challenged on your viewpoints and have people around you who can disagree. I can't tell you the number of times I've watched the same game as another scout, as another coach, and we've watched two different games. I will say, I thought he was brilliant. He would say, I thought he was terrible. And it's about being able to have that respect for one another, to discuss it, to evaluate each other's opinions, and learn whether you've come to the right conclusion. So I've had times where I've completely changed my opinion on a player based on a discussion with a coach, and we've managed to come to a mutual ground. And finally, that obviously maintaining awareness of your own bias. A big one that I get asked about a lot is report writing. How do you write a report on a player, and how do you make it quality? I was quite surprised at how popular a question this is. So I've included something here that hopefully helps. First off, what do you guys think should be on a report? Just think about it to yourself. Like, if you're writing a report on a player for a coach, what would you include on it this very second? While you do that, I'm gonna exit this and my music. I have some reports here. I've had to black out some of the names and stuff because the club wouldn't be too happy with me revealing who they're trying to sign. But this is a report I did in January for a club in League Two. What they want in their reports are just my ratings of player performances, and then the individual player who I've been told to look at, they want something slightly more detailed. But notice that they're pretty much aligned with those four skills. You have the technical and tactical, you have the physical and mental, and in this player overview section, they kind of want you to include a bit of your own interpretation of things. This player, I gave him a 7 out of 10, and there's another player here who also had a good game, 7 out of 10. But they want to really know the improvements and the weaknesses and the strengths of the player. And you can see here they've split the technical skill into two because they want a lot of detail. But the physical and mental are combined into one because they're actually not that bothered by not that bothered. I say that loosely. They are more concerned with the technical and tactical skill. Another club here who've actually very kindly let me use there, it's Peterborough, who I think are in the championship. I was with their head of recruitment to kind of talk me through this. But basically what they do is theirs is very different. Where they don't want a scout's interpretation, they just want you to tick boxes based on how they view things. So they have a rating system 1 to 4. They don't really want your detail of what specific things they did well, which the other club did. But they have a concept of a super strength, which is basically if you score 4, that means your skill in this particular thing, let's say passing skill, is higher than anyone in their academy. And you have to justify why you think that is. So those are two just very different types of reports that I've had to work with, but are also both very, very valid and very, I think, useful. Personally, if I'm ever in charge of recruitment at a club, I would like this. I want a little bit of detail. I don't want just numbers. I want to scout. I want to trust my scout's eye to give me the detail I'm looking for. So things to consider on an individual player report: consistent language. This means when you're training your scouts or your fellow coaches on how to fill out the template, you both have to understand what you mean when you say something. So if I say shooting skill, well, what is shooting skill? Make sure you're all aligned in shooting skill is the placement of your foot, the technique you use, the type of shot you do. Those all build up into the idea of a shooting skill. So just be consistent that you're looking for the same thing. Again, this idea of fact-based, report only what you see. So again, when you're writing a report, only write what you see. A big one of this is there are a lot of players who look great in warm-up. I was at a United game 18 months ago, whenever football still existed, and Phil Jones was warming up and he took 3 free kicks that went to the top corner. Now, if I'd only ever watched Phil Jones in that one training session, I'd think he's the best free kick taker in the world. But don't be fooled by training, is the point I'm trying to make. See what happens in the match and what counts. Simple messages. Don't make it too complicated. Don't try to list out every single touch the player took. Sum it up. Give us an overview. That's what we want to see. Don't get too over the top. There are some coaches, I don't have it on me, but there's a great, somewhere on the internet, if you search Andre Villas-Boas scouting report, it's a great report that he wrote when he was assistant manager at Chelsea. That is the most detailed thing in the entire world. He could probably tell you which boot they put on first. Some coaches like that, but I much prefer simple messages. Just give me a general idea, give me a feel of the player. So that when I watch him, I kind of already know what I'm kind of going to look for. And this kind of aligns with this. Focus on the needs of the reader. This is the big one. Like, if your manager or your coach or yourself, you're doing it for yourself, likes detail, put that detail in. But understand that the report has to convey a message. It's not just about looking pretty. It's about effectively conveying a message. The other thing is developing a club template. So those 2 reports I showed you were 2 different clubs, 2 different templates. And they've developed this over many years, and they're still developing. So the first thing is clear values. How do you play football? What do you value in the skill? So Peterborough, you saw there on their form, they really valued the technical skills around ball possession and ball mastery. They want their academy players to be skillful footballers, play passes on both feet, and that's why they had those as the focus. Other clubs might be, more physical focus. So I think Chelsea is a great example of that. Their academy for many years has been quick, strong, and versatile. Has been their 3 main points they have for their youth players coming through. It's all about your club and your own philosophy when you're developing this template. I think what fits your goals. You can't have the same goals as a grassroots club as Manchester United. It's just not going to happen. You have to be willing to adapt your skills, your idea of what skill looks like in order to fit your purpose. Age appropriate. Don't have the same idea in mind of what Virgil van Dijk can do versus what a 9-year-old can do. You're just going to be very disappointed in a lot of players. Realize that players develop all the time, and give yourself a little bit of an allowance with them on their age and let them grow into themselves. Simple and precise, this does the explaining, but be very specific about the skill. So a great one is first touch. People love to say so-and-so player has a poor first touch, so-and-so has a great first touch. I think an example of this, Romelu Lukaku. People love to say he has a poor first touch. I completely disagree with that. He has a problem trapping a ball close to him, but he actually has a great first touch in terms of when he has to flick the ball on and find space. He's very intelligent about doing that. So being very specific in what a good first touch is to use is exceedingly important. Constantly developing and fits me the reader. So again, constantly developing, be reviewing your template every single day. I have a template that I use that's very similar to that one that I blacked out, but I consistently look at it every few months to see, actually, I'm looking at identifying players who might be not physically skilled enough. I need to look at that a bit closer. How can I change my report to focus more on that? And again, fit me to the reader. If you ever want more on this, I have more examples. I just cut them for time. I'll leave my social media links at the end of this presentation, but when I'm set, feel free to message me and I can DM them to you and we can have a chat about club templates and what other clubs do. There's some really interesting stuff out there about this. So going to the end here, so I want you guys to reflect. What is your own personal philosophy on football? What do you consider as good football? A big one for me is I love midfielders in the mold of Yaya Toure. That to me is the ideal midfielder. Can play both ways, great physically, great technically, very press resistant. That's what I consider good football. So when I look at midfielders, I look at it in that lens. I'm very clear in my mind on this. And I mentioned earlier about goalkeepers. I'm very clear in my mind on that. But again, it's about this constant reflection, constant tallying up of that. And if you do work for a club or an organization, I just think, does your club's philosophy align with your own? I've been in situations where I've recommended a player to a club, and every other scout in the department says, well, he doesn't fit us. He's not what we're looking for. And I've thought that this kid is the absolute 10 out of 10 prospect. So how do you, as a scout working for a club or working for an organization, how do you navigate that? I think the important thing is to be flexible, evolve yourself to be able to evolve your template and your thoughts, so you can make sure you capture every player possible. I know there are a few questions, so if you do want to just put them into the chat, so at the end here. But while we're waiting for the questions, perhaps if you guys want, you can feel free to follow me, Naythan D-K on Instagram and Twitter. Hit me up if you ever want more information. This presentation originally was a 6-hour class that I teach. So once COVID is over, I'll be back to teaching that if you want to get involved. So I've had to really cut this down from 6 hours into 45 minutes. So there's a lot more detail we can explore. Contact me. Also, many thanks to African Sports Network. You guys have been a great support, and we're going to be doing more of these, so give them a follow. But yeah, any questions you may have, feel free to put them into the chat that I can see. So this question here from Richard: what is the process of getting certified as a player agent in Kenya and even internationally? Okay, so being certified as an agent is country specific. The rules are country specific, I believe. It used to be a grand FIFA sort of licensing, but they realized it didn't really filter down too well. You had a lot of very dodgy people getting involved. So now it's country specific. If it's Kenya, what you need to do is you need to contact FKF. There's a fee to be paid. I think you need a certificate of good conduct from the police, and there's a form to fill out. And yeah, then you get the certification. But if you should then move a player to, let's say, Sweden, you'll need to do whatever the process is in Sweden to be certified as an agent there. So it's quite country specific. Yeah, any other questions? So I'm getting a question from Cyprian is, what is your opinion introducing kids under 10 years to competitive football? I'm really against the idea that kids play to compete. I think having coached kids, the first step is fun. You know, as a coach, that's what we're trying to achieve is we want our sessions to be fun, and through fun, development comes. Those are the first two things, you know, fun and development. I think under 10 is way too young, and I think what really disturbs me is recently there's a trend, especially in this COVID era where people can't necessarily get to clubs. I've had a lot of parents who have an 8 or 9-year-old son, normally, who they think is going to be the next Lionel Messi. So they push them to be coached one-on-one by 10 different coaches. They have them out training every single day like a professional. I really disagree with that. I don't think that's right. I think competitiveness comes when they're older, 15, 16. That's when we can start really bringing in this idea of we want to win. We don't want to just develop. So from Leo, how much time can you give to struggling prospects to develop when you play at a high level pressure league? We know at the high level, winning is what matters. Yeah, you know, great question, Leo. I think this is the thing. You can, as a scout, you can say all you want about keep the door open, because coach, keep the door open. That's not all realistic all the time. It also plays into when you're coaching, you're not just coaching the player, you're coaching the person. You know, we don't want great players, we want great people. So you're trying to give them an option to fall back on. But in regards to how much time, it again depends on your club and what your individual situation is. At the very top, you have to be ruthless, unfortunately, which is why the cutoffs are so clear. You know, 13, 16, first team. You have to be ruthless. The lower down you are and the less financial burden developing that player could be, you can obviously be slightly more patient with them. But yeah, I think that's the big thing. How can you, the next question here from Evans is, how can you know you're going to the right academy? I found some of them are scams. Yeah, this is a really awful thing that affects players around the world. especially Africa, is a lot of the unscrupulous people who want to take a lot of money from you. Research, research. Every academy that I've ever known is very happy to show off their success stories. So if an academy approaches you, don't be afraid to ask them, hey, who can I talk to that's been through your system? And if they become reluctant or hesitant about that, that's a red flag to me. There are some great academies here in Kenya that I think do a really good job at not only developing players locally, but also have a good reputation abroad. So I think Liga Dogo is a great example of that, who have a great track record of developing players locally, but then for the top tier talent, they know how to place people in situations that are safe. Other questions? So what are some of the factors we should consider when recruiting kids to join our academy? So obviously they are the skills as we've talked about, but I think another great thing is fit. And when I mean fit, I mean more of like a personality feeling sort of thing. If your culture around your academy is, very relaxed and you're all very, relaxed one another, calm, it's very friendly, that's the word, friendly. That might be great for a player like me. It would have been great for a player like me. But my best friend, great footballer, that would have been terrible for him. He needed a more harder environment that kind of would push him to success. So it's about considering all these, aspects that are beyond football as well. When you're recruiting a player, otherwise you're going to end up players who could be the most talented player in the world, but they just never really settle. So that's another thing to consider. Or Amy, are there any more questions? Okay, so I can actually see some of them here. Is there a certain age for scouting or to be scouted? So Brian, I think the question is, I think always say is scouted by who? I think the window to play in Kenya is a lot bigger than the window to play in Europe. That's just a fact. In Kenya, you can probably go through the play in high school, play in secondary school games, and still make a career for yourself in Kenyan football. If you aspire to play in Europe, you're looking at, I don't want to be too committed on this because there will be exceptions, 17, 18 max. You need to be in a situation where European clubs are looking at you actively. I know that's the big dream for every footballer, and it is the reason that they are so few is that it's very difficult. It's very difficult. It is very difficult to get scouted by those clubs, and they don't pay too much attention to Kenya. So in Kenya, I say if you're 17, 18, and you're not necessarily at least been contacted by clubs in Europe, you've not had trials, you're starting to maybe reconsider your aspirations. Anymore. Um, so I can see a question here from Vincent Otieno. Says, what do you think the reasons are behind so few East African players in European top leagues despite the talent being there? That's actually a very interesting question with a very broad answer. Truth is, this is actually what I'm writing specifically my master's thesis on. But basically, there are lots of processes in the transfer market that makes it difficult for East African players. We don't have scouts looking at us. We don't have agents moving players who are reputable. We don't have the correct facilities here locally to attract interest. And there's also a level of clubs are interested in what they know. They know Nigeria produces good players. They know Ghana produces good players. They're still unsure about Kenya. So I think all of us, ASN, myself, the professionals here, we're all trying to change that perception. And I think our footballers who have managed to make it, Victor, Eric, they are great role models that Kenyans can play football at the highest level. Okay, so this question here from yeah, this question here from Leo. So that was Vince's question that was asked. Yeah, so this question from Leo is, what do you think are great leagues, countries for East Africans to go to that further? Example, Scandinavian leagues seem to attract a decent number of Africans. And do you know how European club scouting network works in Africa? So yeah, so I think Scandinavia is a great port of call for the very top tier of Kenyan players. If I was a player of that caliber, that's where I'm aiming to go. Their leagues are competitive and well respected, but the logistical issue, realistically, you're not gonna move from Kenya to the Premier League. It's never going to happen. But a move to like a Sweden or Norway is a good middle ground before you then break into necessarily a bigger league of Belgium, France, Scotland. So yeah, Scandinavia is a great league. I would be interested to see where the development goes with the next tier down. So not the top tier players, but that middle tier player. I think the future personally is moving players from Kenya to countries like Estonia, Lithuania, Latvia, countries that have smaller leagues, not necessarily that strict registration requirements for foreigners, so you can have as many foreigners as you want in the squad. And I think that's a good introduction, at least, to being in UEFA football. Scouting networks in Africa. So scouting networks in Africa are very loose, very disparate. Nigeria and Ghana, because they have the tradition and the legacy of it, the networks there are quite strong, and they have academies who are affiliated with European clubs. So the famous one is Right to Dream, who is a Ghanaian academy who are owned by someone who is the chairman of FC Deutschland in Denmark. So they have a very easy progression of moving from Ghana to Denmark, from Denmark to the world. So in West Africa, and this is another thing I'm going to be covering in my thesis, is West Africa, the networks are very much stronger than the rest of Africa. And changes need to be made both here locally and abroad for the networks to be strengthened here. Right. So question from Aloof is, great presentation. How would you help a child work on his mental abilities? So I think, again, mental abilities, I'm not sure if you mean like their social side or their psychological skill, but there are many great tools for how you develop a relationship with a player as a coach on how you can get the most out of them. So a lot of leadership theory, a lot of performance theories that you could read into about if you have a player who has everything, technically they're brilliant, physically they're brilliant, but maybe it's the mental side of the game that they're lacking. I think the big one is support. Players who are lacking in the social side and the mental side, perhaps, it's often a failure. They're not getting the support they need somewhere. And as your coach, it's your job to help come and bridge that gap. I think Ravel Morrison, who we use an example a lot, is a great example of someone who just didn't really necessarily have the social support around him that he needed. And I think the reason he left United was to try, be put in a position where he could get more of that. So yeah, I think just being a supportive coach is a big one of supporting our players. So I think we've had that question already. I answered it, but there are many factors that influence that. Okay, so hi Barry. So a young player who's 9, who's what would it take to be seen with no scouts around? So Barry, the first thing I'll say is don't worry about scouts right now. When you're 9 years old, I want you to focus on being the best player you can be today and the best player you can be tomorrow. When you get older, then you can focus on a career. For now, it's all about have fun, enjoy your football. Don't put the pressure on yourself about I have to play pro, I have to become a professional, because ultimately when you're 9 years old, it should just be about having fun. So just have fun, enjoy the game, grow, play with your friends. Don't get too locked into this idea of I'm going to be a footballer. Just be patient, take your time. When you're older, when you're like 15, you can message me and we'll have this discussion again. I think I think that was probably the last question. Oh, thank you, Ronald. Thank you guys. I really appreciate the kind comments. I'm that's probably us done for today. But I'm gonna try to, if you guys enjoy this, let Amy know, because I would really like to do more of these. Maybe one on opposition analysis. Maybe one more on like a player-coach relationship sort of thing. So if you did enjoy this, let me know. Let Africa Sports Network know. I think our Twitter should be somewhere down here. Follow both of us, and yeah, have a good day, guys. Enjoy your football. Bundesliga is on this weekend. Premier League is almost back, so have a great weekend, guys.